The next time you visit the porcelain throne, you may start to wonder, do I poop too much or not enough? It's a question as old as time. How often should I poop? And, much like the brand of adult diapers, it depends. In today's video, we'll be doing a deep dive into doo-doo. Not literally, of course, as this is edutainment and not a Mr. Beast video. To cut to the chase, the answer is both complicated and not complicated at the same time. Normal bowel movements vary, and quite a bit, as the range of normal could be considered anywhere from more than once a day to once per week or possibly even less. So, to try to clarify this a bit more, it may be easier if we instead ask what isn't abnormal instead of what is normal. This is a bit easier to answer since too much is generally diarrhea and too little is constipation. But again, these seemingly simple concepts are in reality much more complicated. Also, please note that nothing in this video should be considered medical advice, so if you do have a personal concern or question, you should direct them to your own physician, since the things I'm talking about are just generalities, and individual advice can vary from this significantly. Constipation has no standard definition, but it is characterized by hard stools, straining, difficulty in moving bowels, and having relatively few bowel movements, which many put at less than 3 per week. Does this mean that if you have fewer than 3 bowel movements per week, something's wrong? Not necessarily. So why is this definition kind of shit? Well, that's one of the issues we're going to run into over and over again in this talk, and a problem with medicine in general. You need to look at the big picture and multiple aspects of what's going on to understand it. A simple definition is nice, but these concepts are much more complicated than that. So although it's nice, it's still also not very accurate in terms of accomplishing the true meaning of what the term is supposed to be. And this is something that happens a lot when you try to define things. Just like when they try to define legally what is considered to be obscene by law. The answer was, I know it when I see it. Only have 1 bowel movement in a week, but it's well formed and it passes easily, well, that may not be abnormal since it doesn't have any of the other symptoms of constipation that go along with it. Diarrhea, on the other hand, is gross. It's also defined as watery or loose stools occurring more than 3 times in 24 hours. Once again, it's not only about how often it is, it's also about the softness and water content, which is a pretty important factor. It's so important that it has its own chart. Yes, there is a poop chart and it is standardized. And if you have not seen or heard of it yet, here it is in all of its beautiful brown glory. The Bristol stool chart. This chart is used to standardize stool into 7 types, based on how hard they are. There's 1 and 2, which are generally considered to be constipation, and 6 and 7, diarrhea, with 4 being a normal or optimal stool consistency. Now, if you feel a bit uncomfortable looking at this chart, I've reproduced it here with sugary treats for your viewing pleasure, which is certainly one way of trying to fight obesity. So, this tells us what consistencies are abnormal, but how are they at all related to how often we're having bowel movements? Well, stool consistency and frequency are somewhat related. There are several factors that affect it other than transit time, but generally, stools that move quickly are looser and ones that move slowly are more hard. This is because the bowels are responsible for pulling water out over time, especially in the colon. If the bowels are moving too quickly, odds are not enough water is going to be able to be pulled out of them, so the resulting stool will be more likely to have an abnormally high water content. If they're moving too slow, the bowels are more likely to pull too much water out, especially if the person is also dehydrated. This leads to harder stools. And there are also several other things that can affect the speed at which our bowels move. In fact, while doing research for this video, I stumbled upon a new treatment for chronic constipation that I didn't know about, and I'm willing to bet that you probably haven't heard of it either. And that is a pill that physically vibrates inside of you to help your bowels move. And no, that's not a joke. You see, our bowels are stimulated by motion, and so if you have something inside your bowels that vibrates, it will trigger the muscles in your bowels to make them move. To use it, you have to put the pill into an activator pod, and then several hours after swallowing it, it'll start to vibrate. It also has an app that lets you monitor it, because of course it does. And then eventually the pill ends up working its way through you like some sort of magic school bus nightmare. It seems as if it's a good, safe thing and it works decently, but for the life of me, I tried to see if you just flush the pills afterwards, or if you're actually expected to go through and try and fish them back out. I'm 99% sure that they're just single use, but I really wanted to see that warning in print, because I know at least some patients are going to try to brush them off so that they could use them again and save some money. And as far as I've seen, people who are used to putting vibrating things inside themselves don't seem to have much of a problem with cleaning them off and using them again. But I can see why people would be somewhat less enthused about doing that with these. That does remind me, do you know what the difference is between an oral thermometer and a rectal thermometer? The taste. If we want to know more about what is normal, we should go over what a bowel movement actually consists of. So feces is mainly made of material that cannot be broken down and absorbed by our bodies, and bacteria that grow in our bowel and help us to digest things. To a much lesser extent, it's also made of excreted waste from our body, mucus and secretions, epithelial cells from our bowels, and inorganic salts like calcium and iron phosphate. The reason why it's brown is because of breakdown products of bilirubin, and because of bilirubin itself, which is yellow. It's also the reason why urine has its yellow tinge, and why people with liver failure turn yellow. Bilirubin itself is a breakdown product of red blood cells, which turn over fairly often in our body, and it has to be removed because it will build up too much and cause problems. Gross fact alert. You can even see bilirubin and bilirubin breakdown products if you allow stool to sit long enough in water like in the bottom of a toilet bowl, as it will slowly separate and collect at the lowest level. And it also looks and acts similar to bile because it's pretty much made of many of the same things. Since the vast majority of our bowel movements are made of undigested food and the bacteria that's working on digesting it, one of the biggest factors that will determine how often and how much stool will produce is the amount of food we eat that is not digestible. So you may be saying, why the heck would I want to eat things that can't be digested? That's pretty dumb. Well, actually, it's not, and we'll get into why in just a little bit. Food that is very highly processed, or that is made of mostly things that are nearly completely absorbed by our bodies, like steak, eggs, and polished white rice, will produce very little in terms of what's going to turn into residual waste that will be a future bowel movement. This is famously one of the reasons why it's traditional to have steak and eggs as a final meal for astronauts before they launch. They won't have to deal with as many bowel movements in space. This is fine if you're an astronaut who's already putting up with enough shit already, but there are benefits to eating things that our body doesn't process. In fact, one of the biggest contributors is fiber. Fiber comes mostly from plant matter that is too complicated or too hard for our bodies to digest, so it goes through our body without being modified very much. There are clear benefits to eating fiber as it makes us feel full longer. It helps us remove cholesterol from our bloodstream naturally as it binds to it and is removed with it, and it helps create more bulk and move our bowels easier, which helps us to eliminate waste much more efficiently. So you absolutely want to have fiber in your diet, and this will be a large determinant of how often you're going to be having bowel movements. Have a high fiber diet? Guess what? Your bowel movements are going to be more regular and more often. Have low fiber or irregular fiber intake? That's also going to affect your bowel movements. This is why things like prunes and high fiber cereals like Super Colon Blow are known for putting people in the bathroom. In essence, the number and regularity of bowel movements is based on several factors. how much of your diet is not absorbed, how much you're eating, how quickly your bowels move, your stool consistency, and several other factors go into it. Determining if you're having bowel movements too often or not often enough is difficult to answer because you need to understand all these things on a case-by-case basis. The exact amount is going to vary quite a bit from one person to another, from multiple times a day to maybe even less than once a week. The best thing to do to make sure you're having healthy bowel movements is to talk with your doctor. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Frank Ciopatini with Servetti Software, and I'll be seeing you in the next one.